We've been parasitized by so much wokeism that now companies have, in many cases, lost focus of their main mission.
How does a woman respond to infidelity?
Oftentimes, people who hate evolutionary theory will get upset because they think that if you explain something scientifically, this means that you are justifying it or condoning it. A lot of the activists will argue heterosexuality is learned, whereas homosexuality is innate. Now, that is insane.
What infectious ideas today do you feel are creating a lot of momentum?
Most people are cognitive misers, meaning that they are intellectually lazy. If I want to truly find out whether the Democrats were the racist ones or not, well, that's going to have to force me to actually do some work. Why don't I just believe Uncle Biden, who tells me that, no, it's the Republicans that are the KKK white supremacists, and that's good enough for me. Oftentimes what people say in their imbecilic, myopic way, they think that the attack on freedom only comes from the government. The greatest danger comes from creating a society where we will self-censor.
So, gang, I want to prepare you for this, because get ready to have a mental workout in the next 60 to 90 minutes with my guest today, Gad Saad, who is written many books. Let me just kind of give you a background. Professor, evolutionary behavioral scientist, author, wrote a book, which I love, The Consuming Instinct: What Juicy Burgers, Ferraris, Pornography, and Gift Giving Reveals About Human Nature, which we'll get into, as well as his recent book that just came out October 6th of 2020, last year, The Parasitic Mind: How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. And then we'll talk about critical race theory. We're probably going to get into identity politics, and we'll get into a few other topics. But God, thank you so much for making time for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Oh, thank you so much, Patrick. What a pleasure to be with you. When I announced that I was coming on your show, I got a lot of excitement. I must shamefully admit that I wasn't very familiar with your show. Now I've corrected that mistake.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Our audience is also very excited to hear from you. So let's get right into it, if you don't mind. For some of the folks that maybe don't know you, they haven't seen your content, you got tens of millions of views online. But for those that don't know, would you mind taking a minute and giving us your background?
Sure. So, I mean, my personal background or professional one? Or
both. Personal, where you're from, and then professional.
Yeah. So personal, I was born in Beirut, Lebanon in the 60s. We were part of the last group of Lebanese Jews who had steadfastly refused to read the signs of the looming dangers. And so we were in Lebanon in the mid-70s when the Lebanese Civil War broke out. We were there the first year. All future butchering is always measured against the benchmark of how brutal the Lebanese Civil War was. And I could tell you, as an 11-year-old child, I could attest to how brutal it was. We were able, luckily, to escape after that first year of the war, moved to Montreal, Canada, and that's where my adventure in the West began. Professionally, my scientific work is at the intersection of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology and consumer behavior. So I look at what are the fundamental biological drivers that make us the consumers that we are. But of course, I define consumption very broadly. It's not just consuming Coca-Cola and posting pictures on Instagram. We consume religion, we consume friendships, we consume, all literature. And so everything is consumatory. I look at the biological underpinnings of that consumatory nature.
What inspired you, and what got you to say, I want to learn more about this stuff?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Great question. So first semester as a doctoral student at Cornell University, 1990. I can't believe that it's more than 30 years ago. I had taken a course, an advanced social psychology course with a professor by the name of Dennis Regan. And about halfway through the course, he assigned a book called Homicide, which was a book looking at patterns of criminality from an evolutionary perspective. Huh. And so I can give you a few examples if you'd like, but that's when I was bitten by the bug. So, for example, if I told you, Patrick, let's see if you can guess this. Let's see if you are a budding evolutionary psychologist. If I told you, what is the number one predictor of all possible predictors that can help us understand whether a child is going to be abused? So, for example, you could say, if he's born on the wrong side of the tracks. So Give me your best possible predictor, and then I'll give you the correct evolutionary one so that you get a sense of how powerful evolutionary thinking is in understanding human phenomena.
Number one predictor, a lack of father figure?
I mean, that's a great one, and I'm sure it has an effect, but I'll just jump to the actual answer. The number one predictor is if there is a step parent in the house. And the idea being that humans are a biparental species, meaning both men and women invest heavily in their children. And therefore, most people, whether they do it consciously or not, are going to exhibit differential investment in their biological children and their stepchildren. So, for example, if you think about Cinderella, well, the story of Cinderella is rooted in evolutionary principles, right? It's the evil stepmother, but she's only evil to the stepdaughter. She's not evil dispositionally also to her biological children. And there are some very clear biological reasons why people would exhibit that penchant to be less investing in their stepchildren. I'll give you one other quick example. Who is the number one most dangerous person in a woman's life, irrespective of which culture she comes from? Well, it turns out, not surprisingly, it's not the guy who's hiding in the tree, a serial killer. It's usually her long-term partner, her male partner, who typically, when he is triggered into a homicidal rage, is because of either realized or suspected infidelity. Now, why would men be so triggered by that possibility? Because since we are a biparental species, I don't want to spend 18, 20, 25 years raising the kid of the sexy gardener who used to come and trim our bushes. Therefore, I become, when I say I mean prototypical male. Both you and I, Patrick, are descendants of ancestors who really cared that their women hopefully don't stray. So because of paternity uncertainty, men have evolved the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral patterns that create sexual territoriality. And so when I saw the explanatory power of evolutionary thinking, I had my aha moment. So I thought I would apply evolution to study consumer behavior.
Yeah, that's fascinating when you're talking about that. So let's go to the first book, because I got some questions for you just in regards to your first book, and then we'll get into the second one as well. So the consuming instinct, what juicy burgers, Ferraris, pornography, and gift giving reveal about human nature. When you wrote this 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, last month, June of 2011, which has been translated to Korean and Turkish. Interesting to have been translated to Korean and Turkish. What's the book about? And what can you tell us about the consuming instinct, about juicy burgers, Ferraris, pornography, and gift giving?
Right. So the reason why I chose those four examples, there's a backstory to it. So I'll explain in a second.
Please.
But generally speaking, the book is basically arguing, contrary to all of the social sciences, which presume that what makes us different from other animals is that we transcend our biology, right? So typically social scientists think, well, sure, evolution explains the behavior of the mosquito and your dog and the giraffe, but don't you dare, Dr. Saad, apply the same principles to explain human behavior, let alone consumer behavior. Well, that's completely silly. I mean, when I put on my hat as a consumer, my hormones don't cease to matter. My biology doesn't cease to matter. So in a very general way, what the consuming instinct is about is how to apply biological thinking to understand why we do the things that we do when we put on our hats as consumers. Now, why did I pick juicy burgers, pornography, gift giving, and so on? Well, because I argue that there are four fundamental Darwinian modules that drive our behavior. There is the survival module, right? So everything that's related to our survival instinct. So the juicy burger example speaks to that, because we've evolved the gustatory preferences to prefer some juicy manifestation rather than raw celery, right? Patrick and I might disagree about the type of fatty foods we prefer. I might prefer a juicy steak. You may prefer a fatty chocolate mousse, but we both probably prefer some fatty food over raw carrots, precisely because your ancestors and mine evolved in an environment of caloric scarcity, caloric uncertainty. Therefore, our taste buds have evolved to deal with that evolutionary problem. So that's juicy burgers. Pornography refers to the second module, which is reproduction. So many of the things that you and I do, and everyone else does, is precisely linked to the fact that we are a sexually reproducing species. So in the same way that the peacock's tail evolved so that he can impress the peahens into saying, look, despite the fact that I've got this very burdensome tail, I'm still alive. You should pick me. I'm the right mate for you. Well, in the human context, my Maserati becomes my peacock's tail. So that explains a lot of the, and the reason why we're attracted to pornography is because it titillates our computational systems in our brain for sexual variety. You mean I can get on the internet now and there are 10,000 beautiful nubile women that are ready to, quote, mate with me virtually? Well, it's very easy for then the brain to be hijacked by this alluring visual stimulus. Then the other two basically refer to two other modules. Kin selection, explain, why would I ever jump into the river to save three brothers? Well, the reason would be because my three brothers on average share half their genes with me. So if I jump into the river and save them, and even if I die, it makes perfect evolutionary sense to do so. So a lot of gift giving rituals that you and I engage in with one another, if let's say you're my brother, speak to that kin-based altruism. And then finally, reciprocal altruism refers to, well, okay, I would jump into the river to save my three brothers, but why would I jump into the river to save Patrick? He's not my brother. I mean, my literal genetic brother. But in this case, maybe Patrick is a very good friend and he will reciprocate. Today, he's drowning in the river, but tomorrow he might reciprocate and protect me if I come under harm. So what I basically argue is that much of what we do as consumers can be traced back to one of those four key Darwinian modules, and hence that subtitle. I hope it wasn't too long-winded.
No, I love that. I love that. So I don't know if you've heard, probably you've heard this question. You're on a boat, you got three people on, you can only save one. It's your mom, your child, or your wife. Who do you save? Have you looked this one up or no? Have you? Okay, so
well, it's funny that you say this, because actually there is an exact same story to the guy, the evolutionary scientist who was developing that framework. It was based on, I would jump into the river to save four brothers. So who would I save? I guess I'd have to do the evolutionary calculus. Well, it would depend on whether you asked me this when I got married, if I'm 22 years old, or if my wife is postmenopausal, right? Because the reproductive, it's going to sound callous, but that's life.
Calculating.
The reproductive benefits of saving her depends on where she is in her reproductive window. So it's a complicated story, but the fact that you ask this exactly speaks to the type of evolutionary calculations that we go through.
So it depends on what phase of your life you're in. So earlier on, it would be your wife. Later on, it may be your kid.
Exactly. And by the way, your kid carries more weight for you or less, depending on how old they are. So, for example, in societies where they have practiced infanticide is the recurring killing of children, they usually will kill the last born. Because the last born, so if I've already invested 17 years in raising a child, right, and they are about to enter the reproductive window of their life trajectory, then I don't want to kill them, right? Because, I mean, don't forget that I also extend my genes through my children having children, right? Because when my children have children, I am linked to them 1/4 of their genes, right? So this is called inclusive fitness. So I could propagate my genes either directly, I have children, or by investing in my kin. And therefore, in cultures where you have infanticide, and typically the reason why you have infanticide is because you realize that you don't have the necessary resources to see them through to maturation. And so you make the very cold calculation of ending, if you want, their life. Well, you do so if they're 2 months old. You don't do it to a 17-year-old who's about to be reproductively viable themselves.
Yeah. So when I asked this question of other people, by the way, this was an interview question. So, and it was trying to figure out where a person stood, and it would many times give a cultural answer because, Latinos, maybe they would choose their mom because of the connection with mom. Americans would choose their, wife, and you have, different Asian that would choose their child because it's future. It's very interesting, but it's definitely always starts a conversation about what direction to go with this. So let's go back to what you were. Go ahead.
So forgive me for interrupting you, Patrick, because what you just said has such an implication for a segue. Yes, you're right that there are cultural differences, but underneath these cultural differences, there are some consistent human universals. So speaking about children, so when a child is born, irrespective of which culture you come from, typically people will say, oh my God, the child looks exactly like the father. And you're much more likely to say so if you are from the mother's family. because you're trying to convince the mother's family that she didn't stray from the relationship.
Oh my! So since you went over there, okay, infidelity men, infidelity women. How does man respond to it differently than a woman responds to infidelity?
Great question. So there's some fantastic research that was done back in the early 1990s, where they asked men and women to imagine their partner either engaging in sexual infidelity or romantic infidelity. Romantic infidelity, your husband always has lunch with this wonderful colleague of his. They share their dreams. She understands his humor. So there's no sex. It's all platonic, but there's an emotional bond that is forming. Well, guess what happens? Men respond much more harshly to sexual infidelity. Women respond a lot more harshly to emotional infidelity. Why? Because again, men are responding to the threat of paternity uncertainty. Women are responding to the threat of you removing your investment from the relationship. And it turns out that it's a much bigger predictor of me packing my bags and leaving you if I develop an emotional bond with another woman rather than just a sexual dalliance. This is why men oftentimes, in a very clumsy way, when they are caught cheating one time at a conference somewhere, they'll say, she meant nothing to me. It was a one-time thing. What they are effectively doing is speaking to that evolutionary concern, which is, I could completely decouple my investment in you from the fact that I just had a desire for sexual variety. Now, by the way, when I explain these things, oftentimes people who hate evolutionary theory will get upset because they think that if you explain something scientifically, this means that you are justifying it or condoning it. And I'm, of course, doing no such thing, right? If you're studying cancer, that doesn't mean that you are for cancer. It doesn't mean that you are justifying and condoning cancer. It means that you're studying cancer. So if you want to understand all sorts of ugly things that people do, you have to study them properly. And that's why I love evolution so much.
What a thing to study, infidelity, on how women respond to it versus men. So, this is a channel, a lot of our audience, they're entrepreneurs, business owners, sales, they're executives, they're running. Now, obviously, we got bodybuilders, we have mob, we have politics, we have different things that we cover, but specifically it's business, marketing. So you just said consuming instinct, what juicy burgers, Ferraris, pornography, and gift giving reveals about human nature, right? So a company's built their brand on having a certain set of audience. That's who they draw. Let's just say, pick a product. If you got Fox News, Republicans, CNN, Democrats, MSNBC, far left, ESPN, sports, you go to Yahoo Horoscope, anyways, you go to all these different places. How do you see this? Because a company as big as Victoria's Secret, who's known who their customer is for the longest time and who buys their stuff, who to appeal to, how do you view and justify a company that big with a CEO to say, look, we're going to go in a completely different direction. We're not going to have our, the what do you call it? They're angels anymore that you see and all this stuff, the girls. Now we're going to get activists. We're going to go in a completely different angle. We're not going to go to that route. How do you justify to say, yeah, they're doing the right thing, they're going the right direction, versus saying they're about to pay a price for it?
Well, they are going to pay a price for it. And so one of the things that I do in when I'm teaching MBA classes and I'm doing all this evolutionary stuff, I want to kind of assuage the worry of my students, because they feel as though they've wrongly fallen into the wrong class, some biology class, rather than some MBA course in consumer behavior. And I tell them, be patient, because it's all going to come together. I'm teaching you now the universal explanations for human behavior, but then I will give you some very practical implications in marketing. So to address your question, let me give one such example. So if you look at romance novels are almost exclusively read by women all around the world. There's not a single culture where that phenomenon is reversed. So if I want to study female preferences,
yeah,
I could look at the archetype of the male hero in a romance novel to see what is it that women fantasize about when they are consuming such a product. And it turns out that it's always the exact same guy. It's as if it's plagiarized across every single romance novel that's ever been written, Patrick. So what is he? He's tall. He is socially dominant. He is a count, meaning a prince, and a neurosurgeon. He is reckless and a risk taker. He wrestles alligators on his six-pack, but he could only be tamed by the love of this one good woman. I just saved you the heartache or the effort of having to read every romance novel that's ever been written.
I should have never read 50 Shades of Grey.
Exactly. So now that's my next point now is going to bring home the question that you asked. So a few years ago, a company, I don't remember their name, was a progressive company. They wanted to create a new line of romance novels that extricated themselves from this archetypal view of the toxic masculine man. And so they created a new line where the guy, is sensitive. He cries all the time. He sucks his thumb. He watches Bridget Jones' Diary. Well, guess what happened? The consumers, in this case called women, said, sorry, not interested. That's not what I fantasize about when I'm trying to escape in a romance novel. So if you do things as a company that violate fundamental tenets of human nature, the market has a very clever way of correcting your misconceptions. So I always tell my students, ultimately, a good marketer is one who understands human nature, whether they've taken my courses or not. So that's the bottom line.
It's interesting you say that. So I took 5 years to write a fiction book. Okay. It's a young adults fiction book. And it's, we brought a lot of the consultants in. We went through a lot of different revisions back and forth. And once we got to sitting down with the publisher, and the publisher said, your book has to be appealing to women, young adults. The audience who reads young adults, 70% are going to be this age to this age. If you can appeal to them, you're going to be able to get a book that's going to sell. If you don't, it's not going to work out. So even the marketers, the sellers, the publishers sit there and say, yeah, we're not interested in that. It's not a business model that's going to work. So to you, based on what you're saying right now, because here's how I process it. I process it as, if you go read any of the old marketing books, you know which ones I'm talking about. There's a Kellogg, and, you go through some of these that everyone reads at all MBA, business schools, you'll see certain approaches on how to get colors, story, marketing, pitch, all that stuff. But it looks like many of these companies are getting away. Maybe not all of them. A lot of them are getting away from sex, drugs, rock and roll, that whole thing. Does sex, drugs, and rock and roll still sell today?
They do, certainly the sex part. So, for example, if I'm trying to sell beauty products, putting an endorser who has facial symmetry is going to work, because facial symmetry is a marker of good phenotypic quality. It means that you haven't been exposed to the pathogen, right? So to be beautiful is to be symmetric. So whether I am selling a cosmetic line in Romania or Bolivia or Nigeria, people in all those countries, irrespective of the race they come from, irrespective of the ethnic group and so on, they're all going to agree as to who is beautiful. I think the problem, and maybe that's what you're alluding to, is that now we've been parasitized, to use a term from my latest book, we've been parasitized by so much wokeism that now companies have, in many cases, lost focus of their main mission, right? Now it is no longer enough to provide consumers with a product that they need without harming some third party, let's say the environment. Now I need to appear as though I am socially engaged, that I am fighting against social injustice. Think of the Gillette ad a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it, Patrick, where they were sort of down talking to all men, stop being toxic masculine men. Well, I don't want Gillette razor company to be lecturing me and patronizing me about how to be a better man. Why don't you shut your mouth and just sell me a good, razor, and I'll worry about the moralizing at home. So in my view, I think it's a mistake for companies to be engaging in all of this blue-haired wokeism.
Why do people fall for it, though? I mean, you look at so many people, like for example, when Nike announced they're going with Kaepernick, the year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember that. We're like, hey, here's the direction we're going to be going. And they did. And they was, I will never buy another Nike ever again. And then Nike just announces, we have our biggest quarterly profits, and then the other side says, they were right. The marketing team knew what they were talking about. And folks are like, well, I guess we didn't know what we were talking about. So once they show the data, some people are saying it's kind of good to take a position today versus before. A lot of people played it neutral.
As you were speaking, I brought out a prop. Let me explain what it is. It's a memory stick, but for a second, pretend that it is the cork of a wine bottle. Okay. In Arabic, there's an expression that says, getting drunk simply by smelling the cork bottle, which means what basically? It means that I am so weak that it doesn't take me to drink the whole bottle to get drunk. I just need to take a whiff of the cork bottle and I'm already dizzy with drunkenness, right? So Kaepernick is exactly that, right? For most people who are too imbecilic to kind of understand the greater issues, he just seems as though he's fighting for justice. So these are the people who are getting drunk by the smell of the cork. But for most people, I think, and there's actually been a study that has tried to look at, does wokeism work in terms of the share that, does it increase the share price of the company? And the results certainly don't support that being woke, becoming more blue-haired in your engagement doesn't lead to higher share prices. So yes, some people will succumb to that kind of virtue signaling, but I think most consumers are smart enough to understand when it's just empty virtuous signaling.
Is the whole idea about, who cares about controversy? As long as people are talking about it, you're winning. The whole thing about, negative media attention is still, marketing is marketing. Doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative. Do you agree with that?
I mean, yes, in the sense that to bring it back to evolution, we've evolved to pay a lot more attention to negative information than to positive one. And precise for obvious, evolutionary adaptive reasons. And so once you have some controversy that is laden with some negativity, even if it's false, by the way, you've probably heard the old story about a falsehood can travel 10 times around the world before it is, corrected.
Yeah,
exactly right. And so yes, I do believe that controversy works. By the way, I know a lot of colleagues of mine who were completely obscure in academia. I mean, they never published anything. They were hardly at good schools. They were very, very obscure D-level academics who then faced some controversy and suddenly were catapulted to the front lines. Yeah. And so, yes, I completely agree that controversy sells.
I mean, look at Jordan Peterson, right?
I wouldn't put him in the D list, by the way. He's not.
He's not a D list. No. He's the only guy we've ever had on 4 times. Jordan Peterson's the only guy we've interviewed 4 different times, and I had him at our event.
Should I be offended that you've invited him 4 times before going to Dr. Saad for the first time? One could be offended, but I shall be magnanimous and not be offended.
As an evolutionary behavioral scientist, today we're going to find out if we can invite you back for a second time, which at this pace we're going, you're definitely being invited back. But
yes.
But we had him on. We had him at an event 2 years ago. I had President Bush, Kobe Bryant, Jordan Peterson, Billy Bean at an event with 7,000 people in MGM. And I interviewed Jordan Peterson. That was exactly a month before he went away. And he was kind of dealing with his own personal issues. But look at Jordan Peterson. He faces off against what the university wanted to do. He comes out and says, this is the stand I'm taking. Boom. Next thing you know, he takes off. Look at Trump comes out and says, hey, if you remember the 2015, 2016 Republican side, they won. Everybody thought Scott Walker and Jeb Bush were going to win it. I don't know if you remember Scott Walker was like the main Wisconsin superstar. This is presidential. Jeb Bush, they won $140 million. Trump comes out and says, they're sending the criminals, rapists, drugs, all this other stuff. And next thing you know, he takes off. So, there's a bit of it where you're noticing that become even in boxing today, look at the Paul brothers, look at Logan and Jake Paul, how they're using controversy to bring eyeballs to themselves and how effective it is.
It's almost more than just controversy. If I may interject, Patrick, I think people respect those who are not fence sitters. I always remind people, don't be a fence sitter, right? If I were to ask you, who are the top 5 people that you admire most in the world, I'm willing to bet none of them are fence sitters. Why? Because it takes courage to take positions.
No question.
Whether you like Trump or not, he's not a fence sitter. Whether you like Jordan Peterson or not, he's a principled man.
Absolutely.
Whether you like or not Gad Saad, I go after everything and everybody. I don't care. I don't modulate the pursuit of truth to not hurt someone's feeling. That's why in chapter 8, and I guess we'll talk about it later, in chapter 8 of my latest book, I talk about activate your inner honey badger. Why do I say that? Because the honey badger is an animal the size of a small dog, and yet it is more, ferocious. It's so ferocious that it could withstand the attack of 6 adult lions. Why does it do it? Because it's intimidating as hell. So be a honey badger.
So as an evolutionary behavioral scientist, you're looking at ways we behave, respond, marketing, a lot of the things that you covered here yourself. And you speak to a lot of business schools, to a lot of, folks who are trying to get their MBAs. What are your rules? I've read a lot of books on marketing. People have different kind of angles on how to take it, how not to take it. What have you noticed being the formula great marketers have used historically? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, there are several. So let me give you one that kind of continues what I was talking about earlier about understanding human nature. If you're a social scientist, you typically believe that the human mind, we are born tabula rasa, empty minds, and it is only socialization that makes you who you are. So why do men prefer certain types of women? Well, it's because they learned it from Oprah and Elle magazine. Why do women prefer certain types of guys? Oh, it's because they saw it in Hollywood. So that perspective presumes that the mind of the consumer is infinitely malleable. I, as the smart company, can get the consumer to want and like anything that I teach them to want and like. And I think that is a grossly incorrect position, because the genes, as E.O. Wilson, the Harvard biologist, said, the genes always hold culture on a leash. So in other words, culture can cause you and I to have slightly different food preferences, but across all cultures, people prefer more rich food than raw celery. So if you are a marketer, you always have to recognize the interplay between culture and genes. And if you create products that are antithetical to human nature, the market will quickly let you know that you are an idiot. So let me give you another example. McDonald's and all of the other companies, fast food companies that have done well around the world, they've done well not because they have Justin Timberlake singing a jingle, although that certainly helps because it creates top of mind awareness, but they've done very well because they offer something to my gustatory preferences that I don't need to be taught to prefer. I don't need to teach my young child that fatty, juicy French fries is something that they should respond positively to. Here's a thought experiment. I could give you $10 billion advertising budget to sell you grass juice at McDonald's and all of the celebrity endorsers to promote it, and it's never going to take off because my gustatory preferences and yours don't like raw grass juice. So the main lesson from anything that I teach in my MBA courses is there is no way to understand the consumer without an understanding of the fundamental drivers that drive consumer behavior. And that's rooted in our biology. It's not rooted in culture. It's not rooted in religion. It's not rooted in Oprah.
Okay, so fantastic. So let's go a little bit deeper with that. So how much of what I like, what you like, is what you like versus what's being sold to us? For example, let me go a little deeper. No matter how many skinny models I saw in Calvin Klein, I was never turned on by it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I saw, this is what you're supposed to look like a Zoolander looking, looking like, it never did nothing to me. I was almost like, can I get you a double Whopper right now? Go eat a Big Mac. Please eat some pizza and put some weight on. You're 95 pounds. You look like you're about to break if I even touch you, like I'm worried about touching you here, right? So how much of it is us believing in the dream that's being sold from media, from politicians, from our clergy, from our parents, where, parents tell them, a good man is somebody who believes in God and lives a godly life. A good man is somebody that takes care of themselves. Honey, you have to look sexy, put on the right makeup, or, you got to go serve the military because it's this, you got to work hard. You got to really work hard. All these things that we go through, organized, clean, athlete. My dad loves football. I'm going to go be a football player to make him proud. How much of it is the marketing being done around us by media, TV, parents, military, all that stuff? And how much of it is actually us?
Yeah, I mean, great. So if I were to rephrase your question, I would say you're, in a sense, if I distill it, you're asking about the nature versus nurture issue, right? How much of who we are is due to nature, genes? How much of it is due to nurture? All the things that you mentioned. Well, and the best way for me to answer that, I'm not trying to do a cop-out answer. It's really the true scientific answer. So I'm going to use a metaphor here. So if you take all of the ingredients of a cake, you take the butter, you take the eggs, you take the flour, you take the baking soda, each of those ingredients are separate, right? Before I bake the cake. Once I bake the cake and now I show you the final cake, if I were to tell you, Patrick, please point to the eggs. You couldn't. It's an inextricable mix. Patrick, please point to the sugar. So we are that cake. We are an inextricable mélange, mix of our genes and our environments. Now, depending on the phenomenon you ask me about, it might tilt more towards nature or nurture. My height is driven a lot more by my nature than my nurture. No amount of hugging and coddling by my parents would have turned me into a 6'6" basketball player. So it depends. So the best answer I could give you is it depends. Some things are almost exclusively nature. Some are largely due to nurture, but most are somewhere in the middle. I hope that I've given you a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, maybe let me go a little bit deeper with that. And I know that answer, and I've kind of a word in nature, and we'll debate that all the time. Are entrepreneurs born, or are they made? And we'll kind of go. I'm going a little bit deeper than that. So, for example, I sit there and I market the idea of being gay and lesbian to you. On TV, it was getting, I don't know, 0.2% of TV or media was showing what a gay character is, or commercials having gay, lesbian, all that stuff, right? And today it's widely accepted left and right. It's no longer like a thing where Trump was asked on his campaign, hey, so what do you think about the LGBT? He says, it's a law. What do you want me to do? Let's go next topic. And it's just kind of moved on. No one's debating it anymore, except from the far extreme conservatives, more clergy-based, faith-based Republicans. But if I increase that from 0.1% to 1% to 2% to 5% of coverage on TV to 10%, and it's now my face, does it influence me as a kid thinking, maybe I am gay, maybe I am lesbian, maybe I
No.
Does it influence that at all?
No. So I think what it would do, if we take that specific example you're giving, what the changes in culture will do is that it might normalize the existence of homosexuality such that we no longer consider it a taboo, right? So through those interventions, we change the cultural norms that allow us to now view same-sex couple as, just who cares? I can just, without batting an eye. But it's not going to affect my underlying sexual preferences, which are innate, right? But interestingly, by the way, a lot of the activists, now look how silly this can get. A lot of the activists will argue that heterosexuality is learned, whereas homosexuality is innate. Now, that is insane. We are a sexually reproducing species. So you would think that for a sexually reproducing species, the default value would be heterosexuality. But apparently, I'm just a dumb evolutionary behavioral scientist.
Well, I want to show you this. This literally just came up while I'm talking to you. I just searched it on Google. So let me try to share screen and just kind of show this to you. I want to hear your thoughts on this. So this is from Gallup. So Gallup shows, let me know if you can see it.
I can see. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Gallup shows that since 2012 till today, Americans' self-identification as LGBT went from 3.5% to 3.6, 3.7, 3.9, now 5.6% identify as LGBT, up 2% from just 8 years ago to 2020. So, and Gallup is pretty center, it's not left or it's right. Where, like, for example, maybe I'll take a different angle with this. I don't have to go necessarily to this. Let's take another one. I'm speaking at a conference. They invite me to speak, group of pastors. Hey, marketing. They wanted me to talk specifically on the marketing side. Hey, why is, money being given to churches down? Christian, non-denomination, not necessarily on the denomination, specifically non-denomination. Why is it down? These young people just don't get it anymore. And I said, you know what? Go to Mormon's YouTube channel. So if you go to Mormon's YouTube channel, Mormonism is up, okay? You go to a bunch of churches, they're up. Non-denomination is low, okay? Why is that? What are you guys doing that you weren't doing before, right? Okay, here's another one for you. The argument of atheists. That argument wasn't that high 50 years ago, okay? We had it, don't get me wrong. Of course we've had it for a long time. This isn't a new thing. Thomas Jefferson had an element of debating the existence of God. So it's not a new thing. I'm not sitting here telling you everybody always believed in God. But you'll hear a lot of people say things like this. I used to be a Jew. I used to believe in all this other stuff. And I used to be Catholic. I used to be Christian. Well, listen, we're much smarter today. We know, let's face it, there is no God. What are you talking about? It's been proven, all this other stuff. is that because we're smarter, or is that because the people on TV and social talking about that God doesn't exist has increased the percentage of that message being given, where people are starting to say, you know what, maybe you're right, God doesn't exist? I'm trying to see how much of that's being influenced from media.
I think it's several factors, whether it be the LGBTQ data that you shared from Gallup, or whether it be the atheism example that you gave. So one possibility is by creating a, quote, safer environment for someone to truly identify as an atheist, when in the past it was difficult for me to do so, or to truly identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, whereas earlier I would have been ostracized by my family and kicked out of my small town in the southern USA, then those patterns go up, not so much because there are now more LGBTQ people, but because people are more comfortable admitting to who they are. So that's one possibility. But there's a slightly more, not sinister, but, less clear example. And actually, I had a guest on my show. It hasn't aired. The conversation hasn't aired. Her name is Abigail Schreier. She wrote a book where she basically argued that the increase in transgender young women, so biological women who now self-identify as male, is akin to a social contagion, right? In other words, in the same way that a contagion can spread, ideas also spread. And so for whatever reason, it becomes intoxicating to be a member of that identifiable group. So the next question you can ask me, well, why would anybody ever want to self-identify as a member of a marginalized group like the LGBTQ folks people? And here, actually, I'm going ahead to my latest book. I actually explain this using something called a psychiatric disorder called Munchausen syndrome. Can I take a minute or two to explain what that is?
Please.
So in 2010, I had written a scientific paper in a medical journal on Munchausen syndrome, which is the mechanism whereby someone feigns a illness so that they can garner the empathy and sympathy that comes with having that illness. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is even more diabolical, because this is when you have someone under your care, your elderly parent, your pet, or typically your biological child. You harm them, you physically harm them, so that you can then garner the empathy and sympathy by proxy. Oh, poor you, you're a parent of an ailing child. So I was trying to understand the evolutionary reason why biological mothers would harm their children to get that ego stroke. So now I'm going to tie it in with that social contagion that I just talked about. Well, to the extent that it now becomes a form of victimhood to be a member of a marginalized group, I can get my ego strokes, my empathy and sympathy, by being a member of that group. You follow? Now, as you might imagine, Abigail Schreier got into a lot of trouble because, quote, she was erasing the voices of those transgendered kids. Now, she wasn't saying that transgenderism doesn't exist. She wasn't saying that we should be bigoted towards transgenderism. She was simply saying that for some of the people, they aren't truly transgendered. They are simply succumbing to a social contagion. So to go back, to finalize with your Gallup poll, I suspect that some of that uptake is due to the social contagion effect.
So the irreversible damage is the one I think you're talking about. The book.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So let's go on that. Let's go even deeper with that on what you're saying. So I'll give you a story. I'm in the Army. I'm 18, 19 years old. I love women like I can't have enough of them. Like I was like, I was greedy, extremely greedy, right? And I was a capitalist. I wanted to experience everything and anything I could. One day, one of the guys at our unit says, I found the sickest club, but I can't tell everybody about it because we could all be kicked out of the Army if they find out what club this is. I said, what club is it? It's a gay club. So it's a gay club. Yeah, but I'm telling you, it's the best club in America. I'm like, it's the best club in America. Where is it at? It's in Nashville, Tennessee. Get out of here. No one's going to put the best club in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm telling you, it's the best club in Nashville, Tennessee. What's the name? I can't tell you. I just have to take you there first. All right. So at this point of the game, thank God I trust this guy because he was my workout partner. So I asked him, I said, listen, I partied with you. I've never seen you like men. He says, no, you don't understand. I don't like men, but you got to go here with me. You'll see why it's unfair. I said, okay, let's go. So we go to the club. So we take one of our friends. It's four of us now, two of our friends. By the way, all of them till today were in contact. So we go to the club. First of all, women are there with the intention of they don't want to be flirted. They want to be left alone, right? So they're kind of going there saying, oh, the gay men, I love gay men because they're this, they're that. So there's only a few straight men there. we're four of them. Okay, so the market's on our side. We're winning here, right? But we go in, and obviously it was exactly what he said. It was unfair. It's like the movie Wedding Crasher, where the scene where Owen Wilson goes to meet Will Ferrell, and Will Ferrell's like, "Ma, meatloaf." He says, "Man, I'm not going to weddings anymore. I'm crashing funerals. You gotta see, it's like it's not even fair because all this stuff." Anyways, now obviously there's a part of it that's not funny, but that's humor movie. We all watch Wedding Crash. It's funny. But one of my friends, a guy comes and flirts with them. Now, for me, it's like, listen, it's cool. I get along with everybody. I'm very comfortable, but I have no interest. But one of the guys comes and tells one of our friends, and he says, "So you like men?" "No, I like women." He asks a simple question afterwards. "How do you know?" And I got to tell you, this question of how do you know confused the living crap out of this guy. So we leave the place. We got a 1 hour drive back. It's 2:00 in the morning. We've had 20 beers in us. We're driving with, alcohol levels that's not appropriate at all. The entire time he's like, "How do I know?" Like, "What are you doing?" He says, but Pat, I really don't know. I said,
what do you mean? Who do you fantasize over? Who do you masturbate over?
But here's what's crazy about it. You know what ended up happening?
No.
This guy experienced just to find out if he knows or not. That's
so
what
he had a gay encounter just to answer that question.
Just to answer that question, whether he did or not. So the part I'm going to you with this, obviously there's humor behind the story, but it wasn't humorous on the drive back. I just remember being hammered and we're cracking up about it. But the point I'm trying to make to you is, if media and TV, social, if they have this much power, if they just put it in your mind to say, how do you know cocaine isn't good for you? How do you know you're not a trans? How do you know you're not this? How do you know you're not that? How do you know? We don't know. How do you know communism doesn't work? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? You're like, maybe I don't know. Maybe it is euphoric. Maybe it is utopian type of a life. Maybe I should try it. That's what I mean when I say the marketing today, the amount of influence they have. Is it really changing the way we're wired because we're questioning stuff about ourselves that maybe we just don't know?
I wish marketers had that much influence. They don't. Now, in the case of your friend, maybe he had some questions that he needed answered. But I think that if you were to ask 100 men who are, avowed heterosexuals, how do you know you don't want to get sodomized by a Turkish hairy guy? How do you know? They'll say, well, because I don't fantasize about that. I've lit my entire internal life of fantasy has been rooted in fantasizing over Beyonce and not about a Turkish hairy guy sodomizing me. So I don't think it's that mysterious, and I don't think any marketing guy is going to convince me to go to a gay sauna, and have sodomy. So I think that's on your friend. But I will mention something that is scientifically interesting to what you asked. There is something called sexual fluidity, and it's a real term. Whereby, so if you look at women, they're much more likely to be fluid. So, for example, a woman could be completely committed to being a heterosexual woman. She really prefers men. But, in that dorm at Wellesley on that cold evening night when my girlfriend and I were really tight and we started wrestling, a little lesbian session broke out. Now, I say that, in a jocular manner, but women have the capacity to be a lot more fluid in their sexuality whilst completely being, committed to being heterosexual. It's much, much less likely in men. And the scientific data suggests that. Very few men wake up on a Tuesday and say, today I have to kind of think inside, do I want to be clobbered by Shaquille O'Neal, or is it going to be Beyonce night? No, I think I'm going Shaquille. Very few guys. Maybe your friend was one of those, but he's a unicorn.
I hope he doesn't see this interview because he's going to be upset with me. I highly doubt he's going to see it. But
we didn't mention his name, so we
did not. So we're safe. We're safe. Let's just give him a name. Let's call him Jackson. Is what we're going to call him. Okay. All right. So, but let's go back to that. Whether you're going to wake up in the morning with a fantasy about getting clobbered by Shaq, I can't see that happening with you. But let's just see. Somebody does wake up.
He'd be clobbered by me. I'm the guy in that relationship. He's the girl, Mrs. Shaq.
That visual is just a very strange visual I'm going to try to take out of my head today, Gad. That's not a visual I want to have with a evolutionary behavioral scientist hooking up with Shaq. So let's get away from that. Let's go to a whole different place, but specifically to that topic. Okay, so let's get away from the gay and how do you know, right? Let's go to the same phrase being repeated 1 billion times until you're like, you know what? Men are dogs. 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 Hoes before bros. Well, bros before hoes. So he like a woman. All women do this. All men lie. All men like that's. You hear that 1 billion times. You're like, you know what? That's right. You know, men are this. Men are that. Okay. So 1960, 64% of African Americans are voting Republican. 1964. 92% of African Americans are voting Democrat. Okay, let me say that one more time. I'm sorry. 1960, 64% of African Americans are voting Democrat. 64. 36 are voting Republican. 64 voting Democrat. That's in 1960. Fast forward 4 years later, Barry Goldwater. 1964, 92% is voting Democrat. It went from 64 to 92 in the span of 4 years, right? Wow. So the messaging, and today, by the way, the numbers are around 88%, 84 to 88%. We're still at that same number. Trump, it was a little bit lower, but you're still at around the mid-80 range that we have today. So you hear the phrase, Democrats are Republican, Democrats are for blacks, Democrats are for blacks, Democrats are for blacks, Democrats are for blacks, Democrats are for black. You go look at Jews. Jews come to America. The rich Republican country clubs didn't allow Jews on, right? No Italian, no Jews, no, you know, you've seen that sign before, right? So Jews, so powerful, they make so much money. Why are they Democrats? Most of their beliefs is conservative, but why are they Democrats? Because Democrats are for Jews. Democrats are for Jews. Democrats are for Jews. I'm Armenian. Your wife is Lebanese Armenian. I'm Armenian Assyrian, right? No, this is so. My mom, one day I'm talking to her and I say, Mom, you know, everybody in school is talking about Democrats and Republicans. What the hell are we? I still don't know. What are we? My mom's like, nope. You know, one day you're going to read the book Karl Marx. We're Democrats is what we are because Democrats are for the poor. Republicans are for the rich. You know what I said? I said, I want to be a Republican one day, Mom, because I want to be rich. I don't want to be Republican. I just want to be rich. And she says, no, we're for Democrats. How much does messaging, repeating it over and over and over and over and over again, get me to flip to a different side, whether I look at somebody in a good way, a bad way, an ugly way?
Yeah, well, repetition, as a matter of fact, I've done research on what's called advertising repetition effects, right? So how many times should I repeat a message? But by the way, even for repetition effects, there's an inflection point. In other words, repeating a message many times is great up to a point, but then you repeat it beyond that point, it could backfire against you, right? So it's an inverted U.
Got it.
But yes, absolutely, you're right that repetition is one of the central tools in the arsenal of weaponry that marketers will use. Now, let me give you a somewhat fancier, cognitive psychology explanation for why people succumb to this. So there is a German psychologist by the name of Gerd Gigerenzer who developed a research stream called fast and frugal heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, right? It's a decision rule that you could deploy rapidly. So what's a fast and frugal heuristic? A fast heuristic is one that you could deploy very, very quickly. And it's frugal in that it is not cognitively costly to deploy. So, and let me give an example of a fast and frugal heuristic in your wheelhouse of investment and so on. So there is something called the recognition heuristic, which basically goes as follows. Choose that which you recognize. So if I give you two investment portfolios, or an investment portfolio made up of a bunch of companies. Some of the companies I recognize. I recognize Coca-Cola, I recognize Ford, but I don't recognize Genentech. So one group of people are going to implement the following investment strategy, a fast and frugal strategy. Simply choose to invest in stocks of companies that you recognize. So that's one strategy, right? It's a very naive one, right? The other one is use all sorts of mathematical modeling from PhDs in mathematics from Princeton to come up with the optimal investment diversified strategy. Guess what? The simple fast and frugal heuristic performs just as well as the fancy one. In other words, there are evolutionary reasons when simply deploying a fast and frugal heuristic works just as well. So now let's link it back to the repetition stuff. most people are cognitive misers, meaning that they are intellectually lazy. I don't want to spend all my time knowing whether Islam is peaceful or not. If Barack Obama tells me enough times that Islam is peaceful, then I will simply use that as a shortcut, and then it will make my world much simpler. You follow what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is a cognitive enticement for me to simply be swayed by a repetitive message. Because if I don't do that, I'm going to have to do the heavy lifting of actually going out to find out for myself. So, for example, if I want to truly find out whether historically the Democrats were the racist ones or not, well, that's going to have to force me to actually do some work, whether it be on Google or in the library.
Yep.
Screw that. Why don't I just believe Uncle Joe Biden, who tells me that, no, it's the Republicans that are the KKK white supremacists, and that's good enough for me. So I think that instinct of succumbing to repetition stems from the fact that most people are cognitively lazy. By the way, the answer that I just gave not only guaranteed that I will be invited again on your show, it has guaranteed that I will be the #1 most invited guest on your show. Why don't you smoke that?
Listen, I got to tell you, your level of humility is on a whole different level. I mean, it's like a
I am the #1 most humble guy of all time.
I don't think so, and I wouldn't. I don't think that necessarily helps at the highest level when you want to get your message across. But go back on that. You know, we're having a debate. Friends, family, we're sitting there, and this is the question I'm asking. You know, the question is, things are changing dramatically. Things are really changing. You know, it's just, oh my gosh, we've never had it like this before. Okay, have quiet, rich people who make their money, create jobs, and take care of people, have they been around? Yes. Have con artists, rich people who abuse people, take advantage of people, have they always been around? Yes. Have lazy people who want to be entitled to your wealth and tell you how unfair it is on why you're making money, have they been around? Yes. Have people who always, look at themselves as the, oh, you don't even understand what kind of, and they use guilt. Or, if you only knew how hard my life was, you would know why I'm not winning. They're always looking for a reason why they're not. Have they always been around? Yes. Have people who sit in the middle and I say, I don't know, I kind of agree with both sides. I don't know if I fully agree there. I don't know, but you know what? You kind of make sense. Have the people in the middle always been around? Yes. Have dictators always been around? Yes. Have arrogance always been around? What's really changed? I mean, what has really changed today? Are we really behaviorally changing that dramatically today versus 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500? And if yes, how?
So, well, it depends on which phenomenon you're speaking of. I mean, on some things, of course, there is a social evolution that happens where, I used to, I'm speaking generically, I've never smoked, but, I used to think that smoking was okay because the pharmaceutical companies told me that it's healthy to be a smoker. But then I learned through epidemiology that it's actually not true. And so I altered my behavior. So there are some things that are impervious to change. The fact that you and I, and probably every other man who's ever lived, prefers a woman who has an hourglass figure to a woman who is like the one you mentioned, the heroin chic, the 90-pound woman, or there is no culture where men repeatedly prefer women that look like male Olympic swimmers with broad shoulders and narrow waists. That is never going to change. No amount of marketing is ever going to alter that, because that is such an indelible part of what makes me a human that no persuasion is ever going to change that. But on other things, there is a change, right? Who could have foreseen the types of intoxicating, addictive power that social media has on our kids 10 or 15 years ago? Today, it's probably harder for me to get my kids to pry the cell phone away from my kids than it is to have them love me, right? It's impossible to get them to get off the social media. So some things are open to change, other things are not. And I guess that's exactly what an evolutionary behavioral scientist does. He or she tries to study those things that are interacting with the environment versus those things that are an indelible part of our human nature.
Very cool. And that's why we need you. That's why we need you around. That's what we need you to keep doing.
And by the way, just to clarify, when I do all that bombastic, grandiose stuff, I am joking. I'm not genuine. I'm actually a very down-to-earth guy.
Of course. Listen, just from talking, but you're the kind of guy I would want to go to dinner and, you know, debate topics, talk topics, go deeper. You're that guy. You're the person
Any day,
I wants to be friends with and just have dinner with you. I mean, that's how I judge. In the military, you would see who you would get along with. Like, this is just a guy I want to be friends with. This is the kind of person you want to have in your life. That's the feeling I get from you.
Can I tell you something? By the way, what you just said means a lot to me, and it's very sweet. Thank you so much, Patrick. I tell people, so I receive, as you might imagine, you know, tons of fan mail and all that. The ones that mean the most to me, or some of the ones that mean the most, are precisely from military guys. So the guy who is the Navy SEAL, the guy who is the Special Forces, who says, you know what, we would have wanted you to be with us. And I don't know, maybe it's the machismo part, but I'm like, I want to hear from that guy, not from the Stanford professor smoking the pipe. And so I really understand what you mean. It's about being in the trenches with guys that are cool, that have your back. I'm all about that. Now, maybe, by the way, that comes from the fact that I was also a very competitive soccer player. So when you're a competitive soccer player, you can't get offended by every word that someone says. It teaches you to be anti-fragile. You don't wilt away because someone trash talks you. And so maybe there's also that element that allows probably someone like you and I to get along and be simpatico.
I was having a conversation with these two guys who were trying to troll me. And I told the guy, I said, is that really the best you got? I said, do you realize if you were in the army, the guys at my unit would destroy you with the way they would troll you? You would emotionally be hiding in a closet for the rest of your life. You guys got to pick up your trolling game because you don't have it. But let me go to your latest book. So The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. What infectious ideas today do you feel are creating a lot of momentum, and why?
Right. Thank you for talking about the latest book. So let me kind of give you the elevator story of the book, and then I will answer your specific question. So I argue that contrary to the current pandemic that we're facing with COVID, we've faced another pandemic for the past 40, 50 years. And in this case, the virus is not a biological virus, it's a mind virus. That's why I call these idea pathogens, or parasitic ideas. And so where do these ideas come from? So if we're trying to find out where the COVID virus came from, we're not allowed to say, because to say where it comes from would be racist, of course. So where do these idea pathogens come from? They all come from the university ecosystem. In other words, as I always remind people, it takes intellectuals and professors to come up with some of the dumbest ideas. So now I'm going to answer your. So what I do in the book basically is I talk about all these idea pathogens, where they originate from, what downstream effects they have had on society, and then how we can vaccinate ourselves against these bad ideas. So now I answer the question of what are some examples of these idea pathogens. So probably the granddaddy of all idea pathogens, Patrick, is what's called postmodernism. So postmodernism is a framework that developed in the university environment, which basically purports the following. There are no universal truths. There are no objective truths. We are completely shackled by personal biases, by our subjectivity, by relativism. So to speak of a universal truth is silly because there are no such truths. Now you could imagine how that's a complete form of intellectual terrorism, because scientists do wake up every day thinking that there is a truth to be discovered out there, right? Now, the truth in science might change, right? What was true 300 years ago may no longer be true today. We update what we consider to be true, but we do operate every day under the premise that there is something to be discoverable in the world. There are natural phenomena that are universally true. If I throw you from a building 50 times, gravity is going to have the exact same effect 50 times out of 50. So postmodernism is a deeply flawed and nihilistic framework because it actually takes you down a dead end, right? What can you build? You can't build bridges using postmodernism. You can't understand consumer choice using postmodernism. And so it creates a form of chaos when students are taught all of this nonsense. Here, I'll give you one or two other idea pathogens, and then if you want to hear more, I'll tell you more. Social constructivism is another idea pathogen. It purports that we are all born with empty minds, with equal potentiality, and it's only socialization that made us who we are. So Michael Jordan didn't start off his lot in life with an advantage over Patrick. It's only because mama hugged him enough or didn't hug him enough that he became the NBA star that he is. Now, it's a very hopeful message, right? Because it basically argues that any of our children could be the next Einstein or the next Lionel Messi, but it is perfectly rooted in bullshit. So each of these idea pathogens that I describe, I argue they start off with a noble cause, but then they metamorphosize into the murder of truth in the pursuit of that original noble cause. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, what is your biggest concern outside? I mean, obviously, postmodernism, all these others, but what is your biggest concern with the side effects of what critical race theory could do to us in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
Yes. So critical race theory stems from one of the idea pathogens that I discuss in the book. So identity politics, the idea that I am first a member of a group before I am an individual, right? I'm not Gad Saad. I'm Lebanese Jew first. Well, no, I am Gad Saad. I present myself on Patrick's show not as a representative of Lebanese Jews. I present myself as Gad Saad with all my flaws and all my merits. And I ask you to judge me based on my unique personhood. That's what classical liberalism is. Well, identity politics shatters that. It says you are a member of the LGBT community or the Muslim community or the Black community or the indigenous community. That's what defines you. Now, I escaped the society that is a perfect manifestation of how you organize a society along identity political lines, right? Lebanon, everything is viewed through the prism of your religious tribe, right? As a matter of fact, in Lebanon, there's an Arabic word in Lebanese that says hawiye. Hawiye means your internal passport, your internal ID card, so that if the cop stops you, you show him your internal ID. Well, the most conspicuous thing that you see on the ID is which religion you belong to, right? The Constitution of Lebanon is organized along religious lines. The president has to be of this religion. The prime minister has to be of that religion. This is the number of seats this religion gets in the parliament. So everything is viewed through the prism of identity political line. What do you end up with? You end up with the Lebanese Civil War. That's what happens in the Balkans. That's what happened in Iraq. So everywhere where you create these tribal factions, they might coexist for a while, but eventually the stressor of this political allegiance to different groups will start causing mayhem in the society. So what worries me the most is that the West is losing the belt of protection that it had because of its very liberating and enlightened values. Each of these are now being trashed by all the idea pathogens that I describe in the book. So in 10, 20, 50 years, if we continue along the same lines, we will have a repeat from the Beirut that I escaped in 1975.
So you asked a couple questions at the beginning. You said, what is the number one reason why man becomes a, what did you say? The man becomes
abuses children in his home?
Abuses his children is because he had a stepfather, right? That's the one you're talking about, because a stepfather always treats his biological sons, kids, different than he does his stepchildren. And he said the second reason why does a women end up becoming it all because of a long-term relationship with the man that they had in their lives, because men, the jealousy of women cheating on them, infidelity, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So man, what is the ultimate thing man is willing to fight for? I have my opinions. I've read a lot of books on the topic where you think about, hey, when you start a new country, what do you need to have in the country to attract the best families to come on board? Okay, you have to think about what a mother thinks about every morning she wakes up, which is what? Are my kids going to be safe? So number one is security, right? And then the creativity of man. What does creativity man need? What do you think is the number one thing man is willing to put their lives on the line that eventually they're going to be like, listen, man, you've crossed the line. I'm going to have to fight you for this. You're going to have to kill me to take this away from you. What is that one thing for most of us?
So I actually discussed this in chapter 1 of the Parasitic Mind, where I'm trying to explain what are the two life ideals that shape every trajectory in my life. And I came up with two, which answer your question. It's truth and freedom, right? You can't pursue truth without freedom, and you can't have freedom if you're constantly murdering truth. So they're kind of, it's a feedback loop between these two. Now, freedom to me means many different things. It's not just, freedom of speech, which of course is fundamentally the most important right. But, I try to look at decisions that I've made in my life that speak to freedom in completely different domains. And so let me give you another example. When I used to be a competitive soccer player, I played what's called the playmaker role. In other words, I would float around the field looking for spaces to try to, be creative. Now, if a coach came along and told me, today you're playing more on the left side of midfield. You have to track back and cover. So you are restricting my freedom. It's as if you had decapitated my head. I lost all my creative juice. So for me, so to answer your question in a very sort of existential way, the most fundamental thing that people fight for is for freedom, right? I mean, and security is ultimately linked to freedom. If I don't have the freedom to walk outside in New York City without having a stray bullet kill me, that's not very good. So freedom is everything. The rest is details.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. So right now, if freedom is everything and you are being pushed today, the other day, we make a video on our podcast. We talk about an athlete that gave his opinions on a health matter. And hey, whether I want to do this or not, a decision I don't want to take. We wrote it. We read it, what he said. That video was flagged. It got a strike. Channel was shut down for a week. And then channel came back a week later, right? And we haven't had a lot of strikes with our channel. Our channel was clear, monetized, the whole nine. We followed the rules that they have. But it makes you kind of sit there and like, I don't know if I want to touch this topic. Just like last week, I was at Rudy Giuliani's place all day. We interviewed him 4 hours. If the interview goes live, this is going to get millions on top of millions of views because what some of the things he said. My attorneys are saying, don't put it up because there's likely if something's going to happen to your channel if you put up that specific topic, what he said about that thing that he revealed to everybody, that's going to be controversial. Is it a good idea that we're going in the direction where we have to wake up every morning saying, I don't know, because some people are giving the argument from the other side. Well, it's not, fact checking. It's not good if it's not true, if it's not this. And how do you know this? And it makes people think, it gives people ideas. How dangerous is the direction we're going with censorship?
I think what the example you gave is exactly the right point to make, because oftentimes what people say is, well, it's not the government that's stopping you. So this has nothing to do with freedom of speech, because in their imbecilic, myopic way, they think that the attack on freedom only comes from the government. Well, you just gave an example that had nothing to do with the government. You have a unbelievably successful YouTube channel. I checked it, 3 million. My God, I only dream of having such reach. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, you've worked hard. You've done the right things to be an engaging person, to have great guests. Now you have to think twice. Do I want to lose all that? So what will you do? You'll do self-censorship, right? So when the kid in class wants to say something that's positive about Trump, he has to decide, should I say it? In which case the professor might grade me down in my grade. By the way, in the Parasitic Mind, I publish anonymously several bits of letters that I received from people, from students, from professors, from parents of students, one of which was exactly this case, which is a student had worked on a paper, a scientific paper for a while with his supervisor. The supervisor found out that the student had said something, mildly positive about Trump. He takes his name off the paper. So this wasn't the government stopping you from speaking. The greatest danger comes from creating a society where we will do the bidding of our attack of freedom of speech. We self-censor, right? Now, I happen to be someone who, for better or worse, I'm a honey badger. So I never modulate and believe me, I used to get so many death threats that when I would go to campus, I had to be accompanied by security. The university came with me to the Montreal police to file a report, and I had to bring a whole dossier with all the death threats. So there are many costs you have to bear, irrespective of whether it's the government that's infringing your freedom of speech. So I really get upset when people say, well, so what if YouTube demonetizes you? That's not the government. That's not an infringement of freedom of speech. Well, no, because the next time that I want to put something on COVID, I'm going to think twice as to whether I'm going to say what I feel or not. So I completely agree with you. What you felt is exactly the type of problem that we need to redress so that we can truly have a free and flourishing society.
Here's what I believe in. I believe the bully doesn't win long term. I believe the bully creates a bigger bully that whoops his ass in ways that it hurts him for many, many years to come. That's what I believe in. Because, when I sit with a lot of investment bankers who invest into different companies that I have. Okay. I was with one yesterday in Fort Worth, and they manage around $28 billion, 8 billionaires money, $28 billion. One deal we're doing, they're looking at investing with me. So I sit with them. And 90% of the conversation, I crushed it. 10% of it, I'm like, wow, those questions I didn't have an answer for. I got to work on that, right? Now, 10 years ago, when I sat with guys like this, 10% of it, I crushed it. The other 90%, I had no clue what I was talking about. And it didn't lead to a lot of business. So you get better over time. But what happens is when you bully and you only want to impose one way of thinking to an audience who has other ideas, you make their argument stronger because they get to pick apart every single one of your argument. And then when they get the voice back, when they get the mic back, that's not a pretty sight when they get the mic back. So I believe that the fighters show up. I believe in the sheepdogs. I believe in the guys that eventually wake up and say, yeah, that's kind of enough of you bullying. Let us kind of really show you who the real bullies are. It's the guys that sit around quietly who bully bullies. And we're very good at it. It's time to give that mic back. And you can still have a mic, but you cannot bully people moving forward. You can give your ideas, but it's no longer being forced down. So I'm optimistic that what happens long term is we're going to be taken care of. Are you in the same belief that that's eventually going to be taking place or no?
I do. So if you're asking me, am I optimistic that we'll be able to address all these problems? I am. Otherwise, I wouldn't wake up in the morning with vigor and with a smile on my face and with hope.
You'd be thinking about Shaq when you woke up in the morning. We don't want that.
Shaq. By the way, I love that you mentioned sheepdogs because we're a family with Belgian shepherds. So I don't know. I mean, you were a military guy. All of the commandos all have Belgian shepherds, but we've had Belgian shepherds before. It was cool to be Belgian shepherds. And let me tell you, I would rather walk into a tough neighborhood with a couple of Belgian shepherds than with, loaded with guns. I mean, these guys are so fierce, it's unbelievable. But okay, coming back to your question, I am hopeful that there will be an autocorrective process where those who are being bullied are going to rise up. The silent majority will speak out. But here's the problem. We can either solve it today peacefully through dialogue, through the battle of ideas, or we could solve it down the road in a much more violent way. So to go back to critical race theory that you mentioned earlier, people are not going to sit quietly forever as their children are being taught in school that they suffer from dermatological original sin, as I call it, because their skin hue is white, right? So we've taken the old racism against Black people, which was reprehensible then, and we've cloaked it in the robe of progressivism today, where it is perfectly okay to be unbelievably racist to white children because, systemic racism, okay? So good, peaceful white people are one day going to wake up and say, I've had enough. Now, do you want them to wake up peacefully by attending the parent-teacher meetings, or do you want them to wake up in 40 years and be a lot more violent? The choice is yours. That's why I constantly get engaged, because I don't want to see violence. I want to see us defeating those other idiots in the battle of ideas.
Here's the challenge with that, though. The challenge with that is that most people who are in power believe they will have their power a lot longer than they usually do. They don't realize that you're eventually going to lose your power. It's not permanent, right? Sonny Francis, who's the father of Michael Francis, an infamous gangster who just died a year and a half ago at the age of 104. And he goes way back, Sonny Francis, feared gangster back in the days. He told his son something once. He said, listen, be very respectful to even the smallest, weakest person today, because who's in charge historically changes. Who reports to you today, one day you may be reporting to them. So just be respectful of everybody, whether they have power or they don't have power. Unfortunately, today, the people of power today don't respect those who don't have the power today.
Exactly.
If they did, it'd be a different story.
Well, hence the deplorable argument of Hillary Clinton, right? She thought she was a shoo-in for the presidency, and so she didn't need to be respectful to those great unwashed rubes. They were deplorables, and then suddenly it came back to haunt her. Now, rather than her having some humility and say, I actually was a useless candidate who made some serious faux pas, it was Trump, it was the Russians, it was this. She had no humility to recognize her faults, but it speaks to exactly the point you made. She thought she was guaranteed the power so she could denigrate those that are below her.
And what I like what Twitter did and YouTube and Facebook did is when she started making claims that the election was a fraud when Trump won because of Russia, it was impressive to see Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook deplatform her. It was very impressive when that took place with Hillary Clinton. Obviously, hence the sarcasm. That never happened.
I was just thinking, I was trying to think, is he being sarcastic? Because that's my wheelhouse. Because I don't remember her being deep. Well played, Grasshopper. Well played.
Well, listen, I got to tell you, 90 minutes went by like it's 5 minutes. I had a blast with you. This was a lot of fun.
You are a fantastic guest.
I appreciate you for coming out, and I'm looking forward to the next time. Hopefully next time it'll be face-to-face instead of over Zoom.
I look forward to it, brother. Thank you so much for having me on. It was lots of fun.
Anytime. And we're going to put the link below. So anybody that wants to go order his book, his link's going to be below. Take care.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
I got to tell you, this was one of my favorite interviews of all time because we were laughing, we were thinking, we were having a banter. You know, I was learning. Hopefully you were learning. It was just an incredible conversation, dialogue. Those are my favorite kind of dialogues that we have. And if you enjoyed this interview, there's 2 other interviews I want you to watch. One of them is with Jordan Peterson, where I interviewed him. This has got to be in front of 6,000 or 7,000 people at the same event where I interviewed President Bush and Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant. If you haven't seen that, it's very deep. He gets emotional. And this was right before he left for about a year and a half. Haven't seen it, you got to watch this. The other one was with Daniel Lieberman. That was another one that we had a lot of fun, laughed. And we talked about random things. So either one of these you can enjoy. Click on either one to watch. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.